Now you have a mass that only expects Black people to be suffering, and they're confused when they see anything else. Welcome back to another video. We are deep diving into media messaging in our culture using the movies we watch and the movies we love. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about a divisive topic, something that I've wanted to discuss for some time, the portrayal of Black stories and characters in movies and the patterns we see, both positive and negative. Before we dive in, I just am really thankful for all of you who have subscribed, who have left me comments, who have sent me emails. We crossed over 5,000 subscribers recently, and we are very, very close to my goal of 10,000 by the end of the year. And I feel like I'm going to hit that way earlier thanks to you guys and all the love you showed on my last video. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for being a part of the community and for resonating with the things that I had to say about really asking for more out of our art makers and asking for more. So if you haven't already, make sure that you like this video, make sure that you subscribe, and make sure you leave me a comment down below. What do you think is the Black movie problem? I would love to hear your thoughts, and I'm really grateful for all of the challenge, the pushback, the dialogue, and for the most part, the respectful comments that come my way. So thank you guys so much for that. The Black movie problem. What is it, and why do I want to talk about it? Well, after some of the dialogue that I saw in the last video, there's a lot of infighting within our community as Black people, but also just entertainment and media at large, where it comes down to this idea that we are not meant to criticize anything that Black people put out.
Who are you rooting for tonight?
I'm rooting for everybody Black.
And I firmly disagree with this perspective, not only because I think it's insulting to art makers that we're not allowed to be, held to a standard or to be critically examined, because as we know, art is very much subjective, meaning that there is no one or right way to do things. But I do think that there are better ways to do things. I think there are things that can uplift us as a community, that can encourage people forward. And so that's really where I sit on that line. And I want to break this conversation down into three main areas of concern: stereotypes and exploitation, the historic struggle, aka slave narratives, and hypersexuality, or what I like to call softcore corn. Three areas of concern are actually a really good kind of lens to look at Black cinema through, especially because so much of the work that has been created, these are the three places where you really see movies kind of fall into these genres. So these are not easy things to unpack, and I understand that. That's why we go and do a flyover in this video, okay? Whew, like a flyover. We're just going to touch these topics. We'll be kind of unpacking these thoughts throughout future videos. I'm also going to be revealing something at the end of this video that you guys should stay tuned for, to kind of let you know where things are going to go and how we can discuss this in a deeper way. So stereotypes considered like a widely held, kind of fixed, oversimplified or overgeneral image or idea about a particular group of people. Things like all Black people are good at basketball, or all Black people can dance, or Black people don't swim. These are things that are kind of this culturally held belief, and they're based off of some truth. Not all, of course, but some truth, right? That there's a consistency across the culture where these things ring true. It's not completely wrong to include film, imagery, characters that are based on stereotypes. These can be communally shared stereotypes too, right? Things that we share within the culture, Black mamas and what they're like, or Black church being extra long. Like, these are things that can also connect us. So stereotypes are not necessarily a bad thing. On the positive side, we have gotten some really brilliant artwork in cinema that has shattered some of these boxes in really groundbreaking ways. And they can show, wisdom and resilience in a way, stories that really can capture nuance and doesn't just flatten us into like overgeneralizations. When all you see is stereotypes, you get judgments and held beliefs that refuses to show the diversity of people, the diversity of culture. Take, for example, the angry Black woman trope. What tends to happen is that now, not only does the culture reflect that back, meaning that there are people outside of Black culture that are saying, oh yeah, because you're just an angry Black woman. Now they're seeing that and they're ascribing that to people out in the world. But now you also have almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It's a cycle. You see in media something that reflects back to you, trying to make you in its image, and so then it's spit back out. The best example I have of this is things like the Atlanta Housewives. I mean, how many times have we seen like social media, influencers and stars, they're all starting to look the exact same. And that comes from somewhere, right? They didn't just all decide and get together and say, we're going to all have the same face and the same plastic surgery and the same operations. There's an image being pushed out to the masses about what beauty looks like. And weirdly enough, it looks like Black women. This kind of constant tapping into this negative perception around Black people, that we're angry, that we're loud, that we're confrontational, that we're hyper aggressive or sexual. And these things create familiarity because they're tropes that people continue to see. Kind of creates this instantly recognizable character, right? The Madea or the Big Mama, or the character trope that doesn't really need nuance. So no one's explaining the inner thoughts or feelings of that person. This can be deeply problematic for a lot of reasons. It really reduces the humanity of Black characters to just tropes. If you don't have to do any deeper thinking when it comes to seeing a character on screen, how do you think that affects the psyche when you get in front of those people in real life? What are the things that you're already thinking about a person before they even open their mouth based off of what you've seen or heard? And that really creates a narrow scope for Black life to be seen on screen. As I, stair step you down into this methodology, the reason I'm doing it this way, the reason it seems, almost academic, is because this is the train of thought that has gotten us to Black cinema and Black filmmaking now.
I remember a lot of dialogue that had, instead of story, language that was down market, like a lot of F and all that stuff. And what I do is I just don't say it. I say I'm going to speak
the way you speak.
Yeah, I don't need to urbanize or blackifies. They've done it for you. And a lot of times, unfortunately, Black creators, they've done that to sell it.
But that loudmouth, emasculating, angry Black woman trope, or even like the hustler, pimp, deadbeat dad, abusive baby's father trope, it's regressive. It does not take us forward. And it continues propping up this idea that we are just dysfunctional, damaged human beings. The historic struggle. Now, these are the cultural narratives, the movies that, understandably, they're going to grapple with some of the hardest parts of African-American life, the weights of systemic racism, poverty, street life, the urban life, a whole gamut of kind of urban Black issues, and also the gamut of historical slave or enslaved narratives. It can inspire people not only to dig deeper into the history of people and where they came from. I think it can also inspire activism. It can inspire a greater dialogue. It can provide a deeper understanding of some of the things that we're even seeing in a modern context based off of what has happened in the past. That's the pro. Black trauma corn is the con. When we have these historic struggle movies, they can be made in a way that it's not just telling the story of this person's resilience or a people's resilience and, winning over adversity. It can also tell a story that's not entirely true. Like, we get a lot of historical fiction, things like Harriet, Green Book, Woman King. Now, these are based on historical events, but the history is nebulous at best. What it causes for people is it causes a distrust of not just the stories that are being told, but it causes a distrust of the story makers. And a lot of times the people behind these films are not Black people. It's not always factual. And we don't read. Folks don't read. You know what I'm saying? We're not reading history. We're not digging and doing the research and the due diligence. And so much of what we're learning about history is going to be through YouTube University or through movies or TV shows. And if they take any, creative liberties, which I'm not against, but if they take those creative liberties, we have to do our due diligence to go and fact check those things. And more often than not, we won't. So this is going to be the only history that people see. I think that there's something to be said about Black trauma porn that is a whole genre where people want to see the suffering at a large scale. This can feel very oppressive and re-traumatizing with really no hope for the next steps. I don't know about you, but anytime I go see a historic struggle film or media, I'm just mad. You know what I'm saying? I didn't even watch When They See Us. I haven't seen it. I couldn't re-traumatize myself with the story because I was like, I'm just gonna go read the real story, understand the real case where that came from. I cannot subject myself to that again. And I think a lot of times I struggle because it's like I could only see 12 Years a Slave one time. I'm not watching that again. Like, I'm mad for the rest of the day if I watch something like that. And I think we have to be really mindful, and this is true also of like, even when we see police brutality, we see videos recorded of just some of the awful things that can happen at the hands of the justice system. It just reignites that anger. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't make you feel like, you know what, I'm going to be able to rise above this. That's not what it does. That's intentional. Trauma and pain is very profitable. And we have to realize that if we are going to allow our stories that are often traumatizing and often historically, if you really tell the real story, it's a lot worse than what they wrote and what they created, it's going to ignite something. But what we want is not to ignite just shock and controversy for the sake of it. We don't want to just be Oscar worthy because of the pain. We want to ignite a change. We want to transform. And a lot of times, when you shock and appall people with the media and the imagery, instead of inspiring change, there's a desensitization that happens. And it's very deliberate to see Black people in suffering over and over again. You have to wonder, who does this serve? And who does this help? Now, there is a place for powerful dramas to depict the struggle. That is not the question here. We need these movies that shed a really brutal but important light on oppression issues and inequality. The risk, though, I think is falling into this kind of Black folks being downtrodden victims and only associated with suffering. And when you do that on a large scale, now you have a mass that only expects Black people to be suffering, and they're confused when they see anything else. A lot of the pushback that I receive whenever I say that we should be looking at movies critically and we should be kind of vetting what comes into our minds and our psyche is because I get the same thing over and over again. It's not that deep. You thinking too much about it. You're so extreme. It's not that deep. My friend, if you're watching this, you already know it's always that deep. Always. Nothing is as it seems. And I want us to remember that as we are body and flesh, we are also mind, spirit, and soul. You were created holistically. And so you can't really separate those things. In fact, if those things become separated, there's a serious problem. You got to work. There's actually like mental health facilities to help you work to merge those back together. But when we live in a culture that is so used to letting things fly by and dissociating from what we watch and what we see, we are, I think, also accustomed to try to do that to kind of protect ourselves and say, I don't really want to think about those deep things. Here's why it's so amazing that you get to choose differently, is because you get to decide that we don't want to engage with things that make us feel broke down, that feed us negative things. We get to decide that we can actually detach from that. So rather than detach from your spiritual senses, you can detach from some of this, this earthly stuff that's really not for you. The first sex scene I ever saw and remember was when I was 6 years old. It was the movie Soul Food, Cousin Faith. If you've seen Soul Food, you know Cousin Faith. But I'm probably not the only one. I would guess that if it wasn't Soul Food or Love Jones or some other classic Black film, that some of you probably saw your first sexual interaction on screen, on a movie, or in a media piece. I think this really speaks to a seed that was planted when I was very, very young about sex and identity and love and romance. And I want to unpack that with you all as we kind of do this deep dive into what these things do when we see them consistently. Media has a profound impact on how we view ourselves, and even more so on our private selves, the selves that nobody else sees. White or Black, a lot of us have come from households that maybe didn't discuss, sex or sexuality in a super healthy way, either because we were caught doing something we shouldn't have been doing, we had family members who didn't feel comfortable talking about those things, or we were abused or mistreated in ways that maybe we've never talked about. And I want to be very sensitive to that. Watching sexual material for many people is the only time that they can view something they're curious about or have questions about without judgment. We don't have a great sense of the purpose of sex and, when done out of the wrong context, the destructive impacts on us. So what I think many Black movies offer and offered as sex scenes became more commonplace, more nudity, more seeing of Black bodies on screen, I think they offered sort of a freedom to explore that, sexual content and nudity and fantasy without the shame, because it's in a movie. It's not like I'm looking up porn, right? It's in a movie. I think what is profound, though, is how many of us can actually look at our lives or look at our experiences and trace those interactions alongside the movies and the music and the media that was around us. It's interesting to think about the time when I was 6 years old and I saw these movies, and it planted a seed for me about what that must look like or feel like and how I might pursue sexual relationships in that way. And thankfully, I was cared for as a child and watched and protected as much as possible. But when I got older, I didn't have a lot of context and frame of reference for sexual experiences. And so my own mind was creating these ideas of who I was and what my sexuality was and what my personhood was based off of what I had seen, what I had listened to. I might not know nothing about sex, but I know what Usher said about Nice and Slow, right? I don't know anything about being with a man, but I know what I saw on Love and Basketball. I have these ideas of what is possible based on Cousin Faith. And what I'm not wanting to do here is I'm not trying to project and say that none of you have any type of sordid past or have any type of healthy sexual perspective. These are talking about minor shifts, seeds planted in our perspective about what sex should be and what it should look like. And then we wonder why we live in a culture where sex is so confused and distorted for people. I think this is perhaps even more dangerous in the modern context of filmmaking and media than it is in even the classics. Movies that seem to cross the line for the sake of shock value and exploitation under the guise of being, realistic or edgy. The constant bombardment of hypersexual imagery without any real substance, it's just there to make you feel like you're really watching a real movie, like this is HBO or something. That's objectification. It goes back to our first point about removing the humanity from people. I'm really addressing this head on because there was an overwhelming number of comments on my mea culpa rant about how I must be a prude or I must be repressed or some type of religious nut because of my views on sexual imagery and sexual scenes in film. By the Lord Jesus himself, I was rescued out of a life of sexual promiscuity. It's on my channel. You guys can go back and watch videos about this, but there were ideas that were planted, there were seeds that were planted by media and film that didn't bloom until later in life. And they bloomed in very destructive ways, very dark ways that led me to a lot of numbness and manipulation and just desensitizing me to the idea that sex and my body wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big deal. And I think that desensitization that we see a lot with media movies, that's the reason why we keep seeing nudity. We keep seeing hypersexual scenes and things are getting more and more explicit and they're trying to normalize it. There's a reason for that because it allows you to sit back and say, oh, this isn't a big deal. We don't need to freak out about this. There's really no line between the OnlyFans content and a movie. And I think when we do that, we reduce this very complex, beautiful, prolific act, of sex, which is worship. Depends on what you worship in, right? But it's worship. And you're stripping it down to merely just playground equipment. I know what that's like. I know how destructive to the soul that is. And I thank God that he saw fit to rescue me from that life because I wanted out. I wanted no parts. It's devastating to see what has taken root. We don't have to talk about the baby mama culture that is being glorified. They already are. Mainstream's already doing that. We don't have to talk about the shame that comes to women when they've been used up, quote unquote, by a man who abused them for their bodies. We don't have to talk about the men who have been abused and harmed as little boys and nobody believes them because they're men, because they're Black men. So I think that when we discuss things like hypersexual themes in movies and media, it is so important. It is so important that we get this right. I think the question that I would ask you is not to say, oh, you shouldn't watch that and how could you? I think the story I would ask you is, what is it doing to you? How does it inform you? What do you feel when you watch those things? Do you feel anything at all? Are you numb? And then on the flip side, let's say that you're experiencing something. Maybe something's happening when these scenes come out. And it's not you fast forwarding, but it's you kind of engaging with it. If you're feeling a whole lot of things, how is that helping you and your relationships? How does it help you see your body, your partner's body? What does it do? Because I think if you start to investigate those things, even just a little bit, right? You don't even need to really go and watch a full movie. Get on TikTok, get on Instagram, see something. Ask yourself, what does it do to you? Consider what letting that in really, how it shapes you. Because it is shaping something. It is shifting something. The ability to shoot our own stories is such a blessing, and I do not want that to go away anytime soon. But it also means that we really have a responsibility to exercise a lot of freedom in the highest form of emotional and spiritual intelligence. And it's not just going for shock value or stereotypes or the historic struggle or hypersexuality. These things can be a part of narratives, but they cannot be the thing. They cannot be it. And so I think the real connective tissue to our history and our culture is upholding strength and humor and grace and resilience in the face of adversity as human beings. Like, we are human. And there's got to be healthy depictions of intimacy and love and character failure, moral failure. We are humans. We have the opportunity to transcend some of the stereotypes and the ways that things have always been done. We can really find the nuances in our storytelling, and we can allow for Black people across the diaspora to be breathed into these films and movies. We don't have to just see the same old, same old. We don't have to accept the same old, same old. Now, I know what I'm saying in this video is not like a solution necessarily. It is just an opening to the conversation, because I do think that this is a big undertaking. We're talking about moving an entire industry, an entire entertainment vehicle in a different direction. We're moving the rudder of the ship bit by bit. But what my hope is that we can not only start to support the visionaries of people who are creating some really awesome work, some really nuanced stuff, but we can also be critical in our homes when we're watching and streaming stuff. We can also be critical to say, you know what? I don't need to watch that. It's not going to help me. Or I'm definitely going to watch and support that because that's going to feed me something that'll actually get me through. And I think that that is really the whole goal of my channel. The goal of my channel is to have you really critically examine the things that you take in, the things that you consume, the things that you allow to be in your space and in your environment. Because I think once we examine those things, we can really see where is the health or unhealth of some of our habits and patterns. A lot of this stuff is teaching us or influencing us to do things that we should not do. And we're not even aware of it because we've done no examination. And so what I'm hoping to do, and I'm doing this actively even now, I am hoping to be accountable to examining those things before you. And I want you to join me in examining. This is a step-by-step process. This is not a cold turkey. I'm just going to cut everything off and be Amish. This is about taking your time and practicing your discernment in terms of what you should be taking in and what you might want to let go of. We got time to really investigate these things and really serve our spirits with stuff that is going to build us up, not tear us down. As promised, because we are on our way to 10,000 subscribers, your girl is still trying to make these videos, trying to edit as fast as I can, trying to make sure that I'm deeply researched. And I would love to have your support. I've decided to launch a Patreon, and you can sign up for it if you want to. We've got some really cool tiers there. So let me know. We'll be doing some monthly, Zoom chats, Google chats about movies. I would love to have kind of like a little movie club going, but we'll decide once we start having people come in. But you can sign up for my Patreon down in the description box below. So if you enjoyed this video, if this was interesting for you, I would love it if you would like it, if you would subscribe, if you would share this video with somebody that needs to hear it. Maybe somebody in the industry, maybe someone who enjoys movies as much as we do. I would love it if you would share with them. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye now.